If we look at Greece nowadays, we can't help but feel that Greece wants to introduce a new discipline into the Olympics called financial engineering. Greece invented the Olympic Games. Indeed, during the many centuries the ancient games were played, there was a 600-year stretch of price stability, of prosperity in Greece. And it was because Athens in particular was stoically refusing to debase its coins. After Greece introduced democracy in 508 BC, a lot of silver was found, and as a result a trade emerged after Athens became credible, after the Athenian owls in Athens were the currency of choice in the region for 600 years. It's the only time in history that a country managed to keep price stability for such an extended period of time using coins for trade. Nowadays the situation is very different in some ways because we can inflate our way around things. But the basic issue hasn't changed, that cities, states, countries are spending too much money. The constraints are different at times, but it is human nature to try to work around the rules, and it is also very apparent throughout history that it is far easier to spend money than to rein in spending. Let's take the US. Discretionary spending in the US is only 12% of the overall budget. That doesn't leave much wiggle room. As a result, the US has favored off-balance sheet vehicles. The most well-known one may be the government-sponsored entities, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, that were put into conservatorship in 2008. Only after tough negotiations with the General Accounting Office were those added to the general budget. Other regions also try to work the rules, bend the rules. In California, there is discussion whether to replace the sales tax on gasoline with an excise tax. You may wonder why. Well, the reason is that the sales tax revenue makes it to California's general fund, and about 50% or more than 50% of the general fund is used for education. If you reclassify the tax, you can cut spending on education. Now, the only difference between the California attempts right now and much else what's happening in the world is that California is actually trying to rein in its spending and is using its creativity there. Greece, in contrast, has gone in a very different direction. While California is stuck with the US dollar, Greece is stuck with the euro. Both of these places, in desperate need of money, cannot print their own money. Now, you would think so. That hasn't stopped Greece from trying. In working with Goldman Sachs and the local bank, Greece managed to get money from the European Central Bank. And the way they did it is that banks in Europe are able to deposit government bonds with the European Central Bank for cash. And so what happens is that Greece can issue a government bond that is directly bought by a bank, that is deposited directly with the European Central Bank, and the cash received is directly forwarded to the local bank. There has been a discussion whether Greece's debt should no longer be accepted as collateral at the European Central Bank. Indeed, the European Central Bank requires a certain credit rating to have its facilities be used to access cash. By the way, this is nothing too unique. In the US, there are very, very similar structures. Indeed, in the US, it is far easier to print money. Ultimately, we will not be able to control governments with regulations. Governments pretty much do what they want. But what we can do is we can keep governments accountable. And the best way to keep a government accountable is through the cost of borrowing. Greece, if they don't get their house in order, should be paying a higher cost of borrowing. Similarly, Germany pays a lower cost of borrowing than the US because fiscally Germany is far more prudent. In many ways, the higher cost of borrowing is a reflection that the markets have stepped in where the policymakers have failed. Now, what does that mean for the euro? We believe that in the Eurozone it's structurally more difficult to print money. Greece may have found a way to do so, although it's now suffering the backlash. Generally speaking though, because there is no central government in the Eurozone, that can simply print $1 trillion and stuff it into the banking system. Any bank recapitalization has to come out of the local budgets, the regional budgets. It is far more difficult to print money. It's also generally more difficult to spend money. Now, Greece, of course, has been in the news a lot and is a huge challenge. But it should be seen in the context of what it is. The Greek gross domestic product is 2% of the Eurozone GDP. Now, in a worst-case scenario that there were a default, and please note, Greece at this stage hasn't even asked for help. And the reason they haven't asked for help is because they wouldn't be able to institute reforms locally if all the help was lined up already. But if there indeed were to be a default of Greece, we already know, or at least we believe, that the European Central Bank would provide unlimited liquidity to the rest of the banking system within Europe. The European Central Bank has learned how to keep financial institutions alive. Governments don't evaporate like investment banks do. Governments bleed. They don't fix their problems overnight. Indeed, they may never fix their problems. That's one of the reasons why the market has to punish the ones that do not get their house in order and reward the ones that are fiscally more prudent. Everybody spent too much money during the financial crisis, and it's payback time now. The weaker players are suffering. The world will continue with Greece defaulting or Greece not defaulting. What we believe will ultimately happen is that in Europe, money will be much tighter than the US. We think that the recovery that we are in right now will fizzle out because it's unsustainable. We didn't allow the market forces to play out, the deleveraging to continue. In that context, when we see further signs of weakness, we believe that in the US we will be far more efficient in printing money, in spending money, in providing support than in Europe. And when you do that, when you're creating more money, you're going to weaken the currency. In Europe, in contrast, we foresee an area of growth that will be disappointing, but we believe that it's quite likely to happen on the backdrop of a much stronger currency. I'm Merk, the portfolio manager of the Merk mutual funds. Please visit our websites to learn about our funds. Please subscribe to this video, and we look forward to seeing you on an upcoming video.